There are 3 different prison sentences in the Book of Enoch: 70 generations, 10,000 years, and forever. Most people who read this book only ever hear about one of them. The famous story is the Watchers, angels who came down, took human wives, taught men to forge weapons and read the stars, and were bound under the hills of the earth for 70 generations to wait for judgment. That is the story every channel tells. But in chapter 18, and again in chapter 21, Enoch is taken somewhere else, past the edge of the world, past an abyss with columns of fire falling into it, to a place with no sky above it and no ground beneath it, no water, no birds, and in that place, bound together like burning mountains, 7 stars. Enoch asks what they did. The angel answers him directly. And the answer is not lust, not forbidden knowledge, not bloodshed. These 7 were imprisoned because they did not come forth at the times they were assigned. They were late. For that, the text says they are bound for 10,000 years, a sentence that appears nowhere else in the book, given to a category of being that is not the Watchers. In a prison, the text describes as already standing before any of it happened. If forgotten scripture fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week we go back into the texts that were left out. The strange part is that almost nobody talks about the second one. The Book of Enoch is a Jewish text written in Aramaic somewhere in the 3rd or 2nd century before Christ. It claims to be the testimony of Enoch, the man Genesis says walked with God and then simply was not, because God took him. The book fills in what Genesis leaves blank: where he went, what he was shown. The first 16 chapters are the Watchers, the descent, the corruption of humanity, the giants, the judgment. That material is the reason the book survived, and the reason it was eventually pushed out of the Western canon. But chapters 17 through 36 are something different. They are a travelogue. An angel takes Enoch to the ends of the earth and shows him the machinery of the world, the storehouses of the winds, the cornerstone of the earth, the pillars of heaven, the mountain where God's throne sits. It reads less like a vision and more like an inspection. And twice in that tour, Enoch is shown a prison. Not the same prison twice. The text is explicit about this. In chapter 21, Enoch stands in one facility, looks at what is chained there, asks his question, receives an answer, and then walks to a second facility that the text describes as more horrible than the first. Different location, different inmates, different sentence. We have the Aramaic. Fragments of these exact journey chapters were recovered from Cave 4 at Qumran among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they are the only surviving Aramaic text of this section of the book. We have the complete version in Ethiopic, the language called Ge'ez, preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which never removed Enoch from its Bible and still reads it as scripture today. So the material is not obscure, it is not hidden. It sits in the middle of the most widely translated apocalyptic text of the Second Temple period. And for 2,000 years, readers have been walking past it. Part of the reason is that the book nearly did not reach us at all. The Western Church let Enoch go. By the 4th and 5th centuries, it had fallen out of use in Latin and Greek Christianity, quoted less and less, copied less and less, until the complete text was simply gone from Europe. For more than 1,000 years, scholars knew it only as a title in old citation lists and a handful of quotations preserved by writers who had once held a copy. It survived in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church kept translating it, kept copying it, and kept it inside the Old Testament, where it sits to this day. In 1773, a Scottish traveler named James Bruce came back from Ethiopia carrying manuscripts of the complete book. The first full English translation did not appear until 1821, which means the entire modern conversation about this text is roughly 200 years old. And the Aramaic originals did not surface until 1947 in the caves above the Dead Sea. So when people say this passage was ignored for 2,000 years, that is not quite right. For most of those 2,000 years, almost nobody in the West could read it. Because to understand why 7 stars are in chains, you first have to understand what a star was. To a modern reader, a star is a ball of burning gas. It has no will. It cannot obey, and it cannot rebel. So when Enoch says stars were punished for disobedience, the modern reader files it under poetry and moves on. That is not what a star was to the people who wrote this book. In the Hebrew Bible, the phrase host of heaven does double duty. It means the stars, and it means the assembled beings that stand around God's throne. In the book of Job, when God describes laying the foundations of the earth, he says the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Singing is not something gas does. In Daniel, the wise are promised they will shine like the stars forever. In the book of Kings, a prophet describes seeing the Lord on his throne with all the host of heaven standing beside him. The Jewish philosopher Philo, writing around the time of Christ, described the stars plainly as living creatures, possessing mind and soul. So when Enoch looks at 7 stars in chains, he is not looking at rocks, he is looking at persons, beings with assignments. And that is the piece that makes the crime make sense. Because the book of Enoch is obsessed with time, not casually, structurally. An entire section of the book, chapters 72 through 82, is a technical astronomical treatise laying out a solar calendar of 364 days, gate by gate, month by month, describing exactly where each luminary rises and exactly when. It is one of the oldest surviving calendar arguments in Jewish literature, and the community at Qumran preserved it because they were fighting that same argument. In this cosmology, the sky is not decoration, it is a schedule. And keeping the schedule is not a metaphor for obedience, it is obedience. Chapter 2 of the book states the principle before any of the drama begins. Observe everything that takes place in heaven, it says, how the luminaries do not change their orbits, how they all rise and set in order, each in its season, and transgress not against their appointed order. The text holds the sky up as the standard. The stars are righteous because they are punctual, which raises a question the book does not ask out loud, but answers anyway. What happens to a star that does not show up? Enoch is about to be taken to the place where they keep them. And then Enoch reaches the edge. Chapter 18. He has been traveling west, past the storehouses of the winds, past the corners of the earth, and the terrain stops behaving like terrain. First he sees an abyss. Not a hole in the ground, but a deep place with columns of heavenly fire, and among them columns of fire falling downward, and Enoch says they were beyond measure both toward the height and toward the depth. He cannot find the top of them, he cannot find the bottom. Then he goes past it. And here the description becomes something that has no parallel anywhere else in the book. Beyond that abyss, he says, I saw a place which had no firmament of heaven above, and no firmly founded earth beneath it. There was no water upon it, and no birds. Read that list again, because the author is being precise. In the cosmology of this book, the firmament is the ceiling of the world, and the founded earth is its floor. Water and birds are the 2 things that fill the space between. Enoch is describing a location that has been stripped of every structural component of creation. It is not a dark place. It is a place where creation stops. He calls it a waste and horrible place. And in the middle of it he says, I saw 7 stars like great burning mountains. He asks about them, and the angel gives him an answer that is not poetry. It is a label. This place, the angel says, is the end of heaven and earth. This has become a prison for the stars and the host of heaven. A prison for stars. The text names the function of the facility. And notice the count, 7. That number is doing work across this whole section. 7 stars in chapter 18, 7 stars again in chapter 21, and in chapter 20, sitting between the two scenes, a formal roster of 7 archangels with their assignments written out one by one. Uriel over thunder and earthquakes, Raphael over the spirits of men, Michael set over the best part of mankind, a list of 7 who kept their posts, placed directly beside a list of 7 who did not. Enoch also makes a claim in this stretch of the journey that he makes nowhere else. At the end of chapter 19, right after the prisons, he stops the narration to say that he alone saw the vision of the ends of all things, and that no man shall see as he has seen. He never says that about the watchers, he says it here. Then comes the charge sheet, and the stars which roll over the fire, the angel says, are they which have transgressed the commandment of the Lord in the beginning of their rising, because they did not come forth at their appointed times. In the beginning of their rising, not later, not after some fall from grace. At the origin of their function, whatever these 7 were made to do, they failed at it the first time it was required of them. And then the sentence, he was wroth with them, and bound them till the time when their guilt should be consummated. 10,000 years. Now set that next to what happens to the watchers, because this is where the whole thing splits open. In chapter 10, God gives Michael his orders concerning the angels who came down and defiled themselves with women. Bind them fast, he says, for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, until the day of their judgment. And then, in the very next verse, in those days they shall be led off to the abyss of fire, to the torment and the prison in which they shall be confined forever. So the watchers are not serving a sentence. They are in custody awaiting trial, 70 generations under the hills, and then a hearing, and then the fire. The stars are not awaiting anything. They are serving 10,000 years. Different crime, different location, different duration, different legal status. In the same book, from the same author, describing the same universe. And this is where the translations stop agreeing with each other. That phrase at the end of chapter 18, the one that sets the length of the sentence, is not stable across the manuscript tradition. The Standard English edition, produced by R.H. Charles, renders it as 10,000 years, and that is the reading almost everyone has read. But other renderings of the Ethiopic give something else entirely. Bound until the consummation of their sin, in the year of mystery. Not a number, a name. Nobody is hiding this. It sits in the footnotes of the critical editions, but footnotes are where things go to be forgotten, and the effect is that most readers have only ever seen one of the 2 possibilities. Either these beings have a fixed term measured in years, or they have a term measured against an event that has not been disclosed. And there is one more piece from the same stretch of text that almost every summary flattens. Chapter 19. Uriel is still speaking to Enoch, and he describes another group. Here shall stand the angels who have connected themselves with women, he says, and their spirits, assuming many different forms, are defiling mankind, and shall lead them astray into sacrificing to demons as gods. Their spirits. Not their bodies. The watchers who fell are physically restrained, but the text says something of theirs is still operating on the surface, still shaping what human beings worship. The stars get no such description. Nothing about them leaks. Nothing about them influences anything. They are simply bound in a place outside the structure of the world, running out a clock. Whatever they are, the text treats them as more thoroughly contained than the beings everyone else is afraid of. And then, in chapter 21, Enoch goes back. This is the part that should have made this passage famous, and somehow did not. Chapter 20 starts by listing the 7 archangels and their assignments, which reads like a formal handover. Then chapter 21 begins, and Enoch says, I proceeded to where things were chaotic. And I saw there something horrible, he says. I saw neither a heaven above nor a firmly founded earth, but a place chaotic and horrible. Same description. No ceiling, no floor. He is standing in the same category of location. And there I saw 7 stars of the heaven bound together in it, like great mountains and burning with fire. 7 again. Bound together again. Burning mountains again. Then Enoch asks the question a second time, and he asks it more sharply than before. For what sin are they bound, he says, and on what account have they been cast in hither? And Uriel does not answer him. Not immediately. Enoch, he says, why do you ask, and why are you so eager for the truth? That line does not belong in a straightforward tour. Enoch has been asking questions for 4 chapters and receiving patient explanations. Here, and only here, the angel pushes back on the asking itself. Something about this particular question is treated as reaching for more than the visitor is owed. Then Uriel answers anyway. These are of the number of the stars of heaven, which have transgressed the commandment of the Lord, and are bound here till 10,000 years, the time entailed by their sins, are consummated. 10,000 years, confirmed a second time by a named angel in a separate scene. And then comes the line that makes the whole argument. Enoch does not stop there. And from thence I went to another place, he says, which was still more horrible than the former. He leaves. He walks out of the star prison and into somewhere worse. And he describes what he finds. A great fire which burnt and blazed, a place cleft as far as the abyss, full of great descending columns of fire. And he says he could not see how far it extended, could not judge its size, and could not find its source. Enoch is frightened by it in a way he was not frightened before. How fearful is this place, he says. How terrible to look upon. Uriel asks him why he is afraid, and then he tells him what it is. This place, he says, is the prison of the angels, and here they will be imprisoned forever. There it is, in a single chapter, in sequence, in the order Enoch walked it. One facility holding 7 stars for 10,000 years. A second facility, worse than the first, holding angels forever. 2 prisons, 2 populations, 2 sentences. One of them ends, one of them does not. And the book is not finished with them, because much later, in a completely different section, the same crime shows up again, not as history, as forecast. Chapters 72 through 82 are the astronomical material, and Uriel is the one delivering it. He walks Enoch through the sun, the moon, the leaders of the stars, their tasks and their times and their departures. And then, in chapter 80, the tone changes, and he begins describing what happens in the days of the sinners. The years will be shortened, he says. The seed will be laid in the fields. The rain will be held back. The moon will alter her order and not appear at her time. And then this, many chiefs of the stars shall transgress the order, and these shall alter their orbits and tasks, and not appear at the seasons prescribed to them. Set that beside chapter 18, and the wording is nearly identical. Transgress the order, not appear at the appointed times. It is the exact charge that puts 7 of them in a place with no sky and no ground, stated in the future tense, and applied not to 7 but to many. Whatever happened at the beginning of their rising, this book says it is going to happen again. And Uriel adds one more detail about what it does to the people watching from the ground. The whole order of the stars, he says, shall be concealed from the sinners. The thoughts of those on the earth shall err concerning them, and they shall take them to be gods. So the recurrence is not only a cosmic event, it is a religious one. The stars go off schedule, and human beings start worshiping them. Now here is the honest objection, and it deserves to be said out loud. George Nicholsburg, whose 2-volume commentary is the standard scholarly work on this book, argues that chapters 20 through 36 are a rewritten and reversed version of the westward journey in chapters 17 through 19. On that reading, the scenes in chapter 21 are doublets, the same 2 locations, described a second time from the other direction because the author was working two versions of one tradition into a single manuscript. Michael Heiser pointed at the same tension from a different angle. In one verse, the word stars seems to reach toward the transgressing watchers, and two verses earlier, the stars are counted at 7 and described as burning mountains. Ancient cosmology let a word mean a celestial object and a divine being at the same time, and that overlap makes clean separation difficult. So the scholarly caution is real, and I am not going to hide it from you. But notice what the doublet argument does not resolve. Even if chapter 21 is retelling chapter 18, both accounts still contain two places, visited one after the other, with different inhabitants. Even if the author is repeating himself, he repeats the 10,000 years both times, and he never once gives that number to the watchers. And the crime never changes across either telling. Both times, the 7 are there because they did not appear when they were supposed to. You can collapse the geography. You cannot collapse the sentencing. And there is a second thing the doublet reading leaves standing. Chapter 80 comes from a different section of the book, written by a different hand, assembled from a separate tradition, serving a completely different purpose. And it independently treats stars as beings capable of transgressing an order and failing to appear on time. The astronomical material does not depend on the journey narrative to make that claim. Two separate strands of this text, stitched together by later editors, agree that this category of offense exists. And at least one ancient reader agreed. In the New Testament, the letter of Jude condemns a group of men by calling them wandering stars, for whom the blackness of darkness is reserved forever. Jude quotes Enoch by name elsewhere in the same letter. He is not inventing an image. He is reaching for this passage, and he expects his audience to know it. Which means that by the 1st century, the prison of the stars was not a footnote, it was common knowledge. 10,000 years from when? That is the question the text never closes, and the reason this passage keeps its grip on anyone who slows down enough to notice it. The crime happened at the beginning of their rising, before the watchers came down, before the flood, arguably before there was anyone on the surface to be affected by it. The clock started at a moment the book places at the very edge of creation, and the book never tells us where that moment sits relative to us. So we do not know whether the sentence is nearly finished, or barely begun, or already expired. And there is a symmetry in it that is hard to shake off. In a book whose central obsession is the calendar, whose highest virtue is arriving in season, the punishment for being late is measured out in time, 10,000 years of it. The sentence is made of exactly the thing they failed to keep. The watchers are the story everyone knows. They are dramatic, they are human-shaped, they wanted something we recognize as wanting. 7 silent stars who missed their appointed hour and were removed to a place with no sky and no ground gives you nothing to identify with, which may be precisely why the tradition let them fade, while Azazel and Semjaza became household names. But the text did not fade. It survived in Aramaic, in a cave above the Dead Sea. It survived in Ethiopic, in a church that never stopped calling it Scripture. It survived in a footnote where 2 translators could not agree whether the sentence was a number or a name. And in that text, at the end of heaven and earth, past an abyss whose bottom Enoch could not find, 7 beings are still bound like burning mountains. Not for what they did, for what they failed to do, serving a sentence with a start date nobody recorded and an end date nobody has ever calculated. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe. There are older doors in this book, and we have not opened all of them.